Welcome back to the Crash Course Podcast. My name is Craig Crash Collins. No B Scott this week. He's tending to some family issues. Everything's okay. No need to worry about him. Obviously keep him in your thoughts, but he is unavailable this week. So you just got me. All those people that have clicked off the podcast now because they've just heard that it's me. We now have just the true Craig Crash fans here, and that's what it's all about. But we are here on the Crash Course Podcast this week, and it's a special one because this Friday marks the return of the long-awaited high school football season. And before the action kicks off, we've got a lot to go into today. We're going to talk the best quarterback in the state, the best wide receivers in the state, the best running backs in the state, the best defense in the state, and the reason why is because today is our all 3C media team. We're going to give our preseason all 3C media team, so we're going to go through every position a little bit different than what we did a year ago. Last year was kind of a test run year, a year where we weren't exactly sure what we were doing with that idea, but now we've come back strong here in 2023, and we've got a little bit more of an idea what we want to do with the all 3C media team. So strap in, grab a beverage, grab some snacks, because we're going to be talking about the best high school football players in the state of Indiana. As you know, we've been doing the previews all week. You guys have been seeing those clips. Thank you guys for gassing those up. That's been really cool to see all the interaction on TikTok, YouTube, Twitter as we get ready for the football season. So you guys. So the way the All 3C Media team works, you guys are familiar with all state and all conference selections. This is our list of preseason All Stars, and like I said, we're doing things a little bit different this season. Last year we did a quarterback, running back, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, an offensive line unit, a defensive lineman, a linebacker, a cornerback, a safety, a kicker, and a returner. So this season, I thought it might be a little bit easier and just kind of putting our own 3C media spin on it. We always talk about, you guys know your teams better than we do, and that, there's a lot to go over, a lot to comb through when it comes to covering high school football for a state. So I was like, what if we did kind of more of a fantasy football feel to how we construct our roster, make it a little bit different. So how we've got it is we're going to pick 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, a defense on the whole. Sorry, offensive line. We're not picking anybody today, but I guess the reverse of that scenario is the fact that a lot of linemen play both ways, so we're kind of giving you some love that way. A kicker and then a returner. We're not going through as much as we did a year ago, but I think this is kind of more of a concise way to do it, and I think this is going to be kind of a fun spin, like I said. So we'll update this list again at the end of the regular season and at the end of the state tournament. So instead of doing in the middle of the season and all the different times we did it last year, we didn't do a preseason at all last year. We did after 3 weeks. We did it, or 3 or 4 weeks is what we did, and then after the regular season, and we did after the postseason. So that's kind of how it will be this year, and I think it's kind of a cool way to track it because you've got kind of the preseason one where we kind of tell you who we think is going to be good. The end of the regular season, who we talk about who kind of lived up to those expectations, who has been good. And then at the end of the season, it was basically who had the best seasons of everybody out there in high school football. So candidates for these lists were chosen by Indiana Football Digest Primetime 25, their impact players, state recruiting rankings, as well as some IHSAA coaches poll or coaches all conference or all class teams, and also 2022 stats. So it was basically just taking all of those lists and putting them all, into our candidates here, and then kind of picking the best players from all of those different avenues. So let's get things started off hot here. Let's talk about quarterbacks. We last year from poll to poll, it was Jackson Willis for us, the junior. He was a sophomore at the time, from Lutheran, and he has been just an absolute force. And he was an absolute force for a Lutheran team that won their second consecutive state title a year ago. He was a 2022 IFCA Junior All-State quarterback for 1A. He completed 71% of his passes for 4,169 yards, 55 touchdowns, 6 picks. He had 6 games of 300-plus yards, 12 games of 3 touchdowns or more. He led the state in passing yards and touchdowns. He was just absolutely insane. And I think he's kind of, the bellwether or the barometer of how we want to decide, because it's like, because I know things get a lot of mixed up sometimes with like small school, big school stuff, especially with quarterbacks. But just the numbers he put up are just absolutely insane. Some of the other quarterbacks I have on this list, I have Tyler Cherry. He's the senior for Center Grove. He was picked as he was picked as the athlete on the IFCA Junior All-State team a year ago. He's a Mr. Football candidate this year. He led Center Grove to their third straight 6A title. He completed 65% of his passes for 2,269 yards, 22 touchdowns, 5 picks. So an okay stat line. I mean, when you're Center Grove, you don't really have to do much to be successful. But what kind of takes him out of the running for me is 0 games of 300 or more yards, and only 3 games with 3+ touchdowns. So the stats aren't there for me. So Tyler Cherry, hey, go off this year. Prove me wrong. Have a season where you just absolutely go nuts. Eli Edwards is on the list. I think it's kind of fun because he's kind of like our only dual threat option that I have on the list. He completed 70% of his passes for 2,072 yards, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He also he accrued 2,500 yards of total offense. He had 425 yards on the ground, 4 touchdowns. He had 6 games of 3+ touchdowns. He's one of IFD's primetime 25. But just, the passing numbers are, pretty solid. He was a threat on the ground, but not so. Like, if he was over 500 yards or, like, closer to, like, 600 or 700 yards, I think there might have been more of a conversation for him. But he's kind of someone to watch as far as a dual threat option. Jay Stuckey is on the list, the senior for Triton Central. He was a member of the Junior All-State team for 2A. 8th in the state last season in passing yards, completed 67% of his passes for 2,657 yards. Kind of like with Cherry, the stats just aren't there. Only 23 touchdowns, 2 games of 300+ yards, 1 game of 400 yards, 3 games with 3+ touchdowns, 1 game with 4 touchdowns. He did help lead the Tigers to their 4th straight sectional title. The one quarterback that kind of, challenges Jackson Willis at the top of the all 3C media quarterback list is the senior from Cathedral, Danny O'Neill. He's a Mr. Football candidate, was part of the 2022 IFCA Top 50 All-State team. He was 9th in Indiana last season in passing yards. He completed 63% of his passes for 2,654 yards, 32 touchdowns, 7 picks. So the yardage isn't as close as isn't really that close to Jackson Willis, but the fact that he had 4 games of 300+ yards, he had 1 game with 400 yards, that was against Center Grove in Week 9. He had a 5-touchdown performance Week 9 against Center Grove as well. 4 total games of 4+ touchdowns, 7 with 3 touchdowns or more. He had 7 games with 3 or more touchdowns, and he helped lead Cathedral to their 3rd straight regional title. So you've got the success as a team. You've got the you have the statistics there as far as, a lot of 300-yard games, a lot of 400-yard game, one 400-yard game. You've got a lot of multi-touchdown games, 3-touchdown games, 4-touchdown games. So the numbers, I think, are really close to Jackson Willis. I think he's kind of the main contender. But ultimately, I am going to stick with Jackson Willis as the quarterback for the all 3C media team. So snaps for Jackson Willis. You are our preseason all 3C media quarterback. But yeah, it's a tough decision between Jackson Willis and Danny O'Neill. I think that's going to kind of be, looking at the season, I think that's going to kind of be who we're deciding between. Because again, looking at, one more time, Jackson Willis's numbers, almost 4,200 yards, 55 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. 12 games of 3 touchdowns or more, 5 games of 4 touchdowns or more, 3 games of 5 or more touchdowns, 6 touchdown games, 6 games of 300 plus yards. I mean, just has the stats, has the success as a team. And again, you might say like, oh, hey, he's a 1A quarterback. Well, at the same time, like, Lutheran doesn't play anyone from 1A until they get to the postseason. They're always playing out of class. They're playing 2A, 3A teams and beating them. And, to do that, plus you're putting up numbers that kind of get past. Because, like, if Willis had thrown for, let's say, because we look at O'Neill's stats, he's at like 2,500 yards. If Jackson Willis had 3,500 yards, then yeah, I think there's more of a conversation for like, well, what kind of competition is he playing, that kind of thing. But the fact that he's got 4,200 yards is just absolutely nuts, and so that's why he's our quarterback for the All 3C Media team here for the preseason. So, moving on to running backs. Now we get to select 2. Right out of the gate, I'm just going to tell you who one of them is. It's Josh Ringer, the senior from East Central. I know we've given him a lot of love, in all different types of ways, from, our preseason, our preview to our, 4A preview, that kind of thing. We've given him a lot of love. Because he's earned it. 2022 IHSAA Junior All-State running back for 4A, Mr. Indiana football candidate, 3rd in the state in rushing last season. He's the top underclassman. He ran 282 times for 2,368 yards, 39 touchdowns, 1 fumble. He had 13 games with 100-plus yards, 2 games with 200 yards, and 1 game with 300-plus yards. He led the state in touchdowns with 42, 12 games with 2-plus rushing touchdowns, 7 games with 3-plus touchdowns, 4 games with 4 touchdowns, 2 games with 5 touchdowns, and he had a 6-touchdown game on the board as well. That earned him 3C Media Player of the Week honors when that happened against South Dearborn last year. And 2 of his 3 receiving touchdowns came during the state finals run. So he's a scoring machine. He runs the ball incredibly well. There's no way he was like, when we only picked one running back, we gave a lot of love to Luke Hansen last year, and that was really the only guy in the way of Josh Ringer getting it last year as well. So congratulations, snaps for Josh Ringer. He is one of our 2 preseason 3C Media all 3C Media running backs. So here are the other candidates for that last spot. You've got Keegan Bloom, senior from Adams Central. He's part of the IFD Prime Time 25. He was 22nd in rushing last season in Indiana. He carried the ball 248 times for 1,600 yards, 18 touchdowns in 2022. He helped Adams Central get to their 2nd straight state finals appearance. You've got Jaden Hart, who had a great year a year ago, over 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns. He had a punt return touchdown as well. He was barely inside. He's a Mr. Indiana football candidate, but he was barely inside the top 100 for rushing yards last season, so that's the only mark against him. If he has a breakout year this year and has 1,500 yards or 1,800 yards, then I think he's more in the conversation. But he's got to be higher up on the state leaderboard for me to really give him some close consideration. We've got Trey Romiger from Paoli. He's a senior. He's part of the IFD Primetime 25 as well. He was 9th in Indiana in rushing last season. He ran the ball 236 times for 1,936 yards, 20 touchdowns. The thing that also jumped off the page for me was 0 fumbles. To carry the ball that amount of times, have that amount of success, and not fumble once, that's pretty insane. He had 9 games of 100-plus yards, 3 games with 200 yards, 1 300-yard game. He had 7 games with 2-plus touchdowns, 3 games with 3 touchdowns. So he had an absolutely insane season. The other running back I'm looking at is Xavier Williams, the senior from Lake Central. He was part of the 2022 IFCA Junior All-State team for 6A. He was 46th in the state in rushing. Last season, he carried the ball 223 times for 1,451 yards, 13 touchdowns, and a fumble. He had 9 games of 100 yards, 3 games of 200-plus yards, 4 games with 2-plus touchdowns, 1 game with 3 touchdowns. So I think between Romiger and Williams, those are kind of my 2 guys that I'm looking at here. But when I really get down to it, I mean, Romiger's in the top 10. Xavier Williams is in the top 50. Romiger got more touches. Romiger got nearly 500 more yards on just um on just 13 more carries. That's pretty nuts. He also got 7 more touchdowns. He fumbled the ball 1 fewer times on that many touches. Same amount of 100-yard games as Williams, and far more 2-touchdown games. So when I'm looking at that last running back spot for me, it's Trey Romiger, the senior from Paoli. He had an absolutely insane season. So snaps for him. Trey Romiger is our running back 2 on our all 3C media team here for the preseason. So those stats are nuts. We look forward to looking at what he can do for Paoli this season. So the 2 running backs on the all 3C media team, Josh Ringer from East Central and Trey Romiger from Paoli. So looking at wide receivers now, and this one was really, really up in the air for me. Kind of going down into it. We select 3. And so here are the candidates, and I'm just going to kind of run through them here because I'll actually get into kind of what was really tough for me about trying to decide. First, we've got senior from Calumet Tech, TJ Caldwell. He was part of the IFD Primetime 25. He was 4th in the state in receiving last season. He was a top underclassman in the state. He had 47 catches for 1,249 yards, 16 touchdowns, 5 games with 100-plus yards, 6 games with 2 touchdowns, 10 catches. He had a game against Gary Westside last season where he had 10 catches for 307 yards, 4 touchdowns. That earned him 3C Media Player of the Week honors. He averaged 114 yards per game and 27 yards per catch last season, which is pretty nuts. You've got Mylan Graham, the senior from New Haven. He caught 48 catches for 1,149 yards, 13 touchdowns. He was 8th in the state in receiving last season, part of the IHSAA Top 50 All-State team. He had 6 games of 100-plus yards. He had a 215-yard game versus Belmont. He had 3 multi-touchdown games, 2 games with 3 touchdowns. He averaged 115 yards per game and 24 yards per catch last season. You've also got Bronte Johnson, a senior from Fort Wayne North, also part of the IHSAA Top 50 All-State team. He was 15th in the receiving last year in the Hoosier State, 69 catches, 1,081 yards, 16 touchdowns, 8 games with 100 yards, 4 games with 2-plus touchdowns. He had a 3-touchdown game versus Fort Wayne Northrop and a 4-touchdown game versus Fort Wayne Southside. 108 yards, 108 yards per game, 16 yards per catch. We've also got Hayden Summers from Evansville Rights. He was part of the all-state junior team for 4A last season, 36th in the state in receiving last season, 51 catches for 883 yards, 8 touchdowns, 3 games with 100-plus yards, 3 games with 2 touchdowns. He had 80 yards. He averaged 80 yards per game, 17 yards per catch. You also have Natarian Tuggle. He's a senior from Northwood. He was part of the All-State team for 4A last season, the junior All-State team. 53rd in the state in receiving yards, 40 catches, 792 yards, 15 touchdowns, 200-yard games, 4 games with 2-plus touchdowns. He also had a 5-catch, 248-yard, 3-touchdown performance versus Concord, which is really impressive. Corey Smith, senior out of Brownsburg, he was 51st in the Indiana in receiving last year, 40 catches, 811 yards, 6 touchdowns on the season, 1 game of over 100 yards, 73 yards per game, 20 yards per catch. Patrick Clax, who now moves from Andrean to Crown Point. We'll see how that favors for the year. He was part of the junior All-State team for 2A. When he was at Andrean, he's a Mr. Football candidate. He was 11th in the state in receiving last season, 78 catches, 1,138 yards, 14 touchdowns, 5 100-yard games, 6 games with 2 touchdowns. He averaged 91 yards per game, 15 yards per catch. And the last candidate on this list, a Mr. Indiana Football candidate, Donovan Hamilton out of Hamilton Southeastern. He was 50th in Indiana in receiving last season, 50 catches, 814 yards, 10 touchdowns, 2 100-yard games, 2 games with 2 touchdowns, averaging 63 yards per game and 16 yards per catch. So, that's what, let's see here. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 candidates for wide receiver. We have to pick 3 of them. So, The way I eliminated some people early on is if you didn't get to 1,000 yards, because that's really kind of one of the marks of some of those guys out there. So Donovan Hamilton, real big part of that surprise Hamilton Southeastern team last year. If he just had a couple more big games, I think he's on this list. He's not. So I eliminated him. Corey Smith, 811 yards. Nigerian Tuggle, 792 yards. Because these are Hayden Summers, 883 yards. So these are the guys that are kind of not in the top 30 in receiving. And that's not. I mean, obviously, you've got so many players in the state of Indiana. So another big year, and you might be at the top of that list. So we'll see what they have in store. We'll definitely keep an eye on them. So that basically narrows it down to Mylan Graham, Bronte Johnson, TJ Caldwell, and Patrick Clax. And so kind of the closest thing, because one thing I would definitely be looking at that's not really a stat that's measured at the high school level. I mean, I'm sure it is within from a team to team basis, but not actually put on the internet or at least that Max Preps keeps. And that's targets. We don't see a lot of target stats that are out there, and so it's kind of hard to measure that because if you look on this many targets he had this many catches, so because obviously if 47 catches for TJ Caldwell, if that's on 60 targets, then that's pretty solid. But if it's on 70 targets, then we've got a little bit of an issue. So I think the closest thing we have that kind of gives us an indication is that yards per catch statistic, because in theory that means that you are making the most of the receptions that you have. So I mean, you're saying that on a given reception, if you're TJ Caldwell, and you're on the 20, on a given reception, he could get you to the 50, and that's completely a change of how the outlook of your drive is going. If you're on the 50, that means you're in the red zone. So for me, congratulations, snaps to TJ Caldwell. He is one of our 3 wide receivers on the preseason All-3C Media team. So TJ Caldwell is on that list. He was on the All-3C Media team a time or two last year as well. Same type of thing with Mylan Graham. His yards per catch last year, 24. 25, a quarter of the field is covered by Mylan Graham. He's going to Ohio State. I'm going to trust their judgment on wide receiver talent as someone who wants to, Marvin Harrison Jr., if he could somehow end up on the Colts next year, that'd be great. I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to default to Ohio State's judgment there. These are people that, scout these guys and all that kind of things. And, to have, I know the catches aren't there for him or Caldwell. They're close to 50 catches. There's guys with more catches. But, I mean, again, yards per catch, doing the most with the yards that you have. He's got a lot of 100-yard games, a lot of multi-touchdown games, which is good, which is what you want to see, means you're getting open, that kind of thing. So Mylan Graham also on the list for me, which meant that the final decision came between Bronte Johnson and Patrick Clax. And I think what holds me up with Clax is the fact that you're now moving. We've talked about it before with the quarterbacks moving to a higher, or talking about from class to class. Not to say at 2A. I mean, obviously you're still playing some decent defenses at 2A, but now you're up at 6A now with Crown Point. How is that going to change? I want to see more out of. I want to see more from his numbers overall. He definitely has a lot more catches. 78 catches as opposed to the other guys on this list, 47 and 48 for TJ Caldwell and Graham. He's got basically the same amount of yardage or a little bit less, same amount of touchdowns for the most part, and a lot of multi 100-yard games, 6 games with 2 touchdowns. But I was, I don't know. I just want to see a little bit more. I think what gave Bronte Johnson the edge for me is that they're both their numbers are relatively similar. You have Patrick Clax, who's 11th in the state in receiving. Bronte Johnson is 15th. It's 69 catches for Bronte, 78 for Clax. 1,138 yards receiving to 1,081 yards. for Bronte. You have 16 touchdowns to Clax's 14. Bronte has he had 8 games of 100 yards. Clax had 5 games of 100 yards, 6 games with 2 touchdowns. Whereas Bronte had 4 games with 2+ touchdowns, plus a 3 touchdown performance and a 4 touchdown performance against some of the other Fort Wayne schools. And then so what got me there, 108 yards per game, 16 yards per catch. It's really close. But like I said, I think I give the slight edge to Bronte Johnson here just because he's kind of already, they, like I said, they have similar numbers. His stats are just kind of slightly more impressive, and also those were at some of the higher levels in Indiana high school football, where Clax has not played yet. So we'll see how those two, fare the rest of the year, because it's definitely a possibility. Like, this was, with the wide receivers, this was closer than I thought it would be. I was like, okay, we'll put TJ Caldwell and Mylan Graham in there. I honestly almost didn't go with that many choices. I was going to be like, oh, we only need 5 wide receivers to choose between, because we only need 3 spots, so I'll put 5 candidates on there. I'm glad I put 8, because I don't know if I would have gotten to Bronte or Clax. I wouldn't have dove that deep and kind of seen kind of the intricacies of their numbers. So I'm going with Bronte. Snaps for him. He's that final wide receiver 3. But like I said, Clax, it's a toss-up between him and Clax, and I just went with Bronte, who just kind of impressed me just a little bit more. So we now move on to tight end. This one's kind of, it's hard to quantify because tight ends aren't like used a ton. They don't have really gaudy numbers like some of the wide receivers do. But I've got tight end candidates: Aiden Steinfeld from Bloomington North. I've got Zach Meeks from Cathedral and Ethan Pierce from Milan. And so, looking at some of the other candidates, Zach Meeks from Cathedral, 35 catches, 412 yards, 3 touchdowns. In 2022, he had 11 yards per game, which, I know it doesn't sound like a lot because it's not really, but that's actually higher than Aiden Steinfeld with 9 yards per game. Ethan Pierce has the highest amount of yards per game. Of these 3 candidates, he had 14 yards per game, but just 240 yards and just 1 touchdown last year for Milan. He was on the IHSAA All-State team for 1A. So Pierce doesn't really have a lot, that highest stats. I would like for my, all 3C media tight end to have more than 250 yards. Zach Meeks would like to see maybe more production. Obviously, this is all about usage. It's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's just, Cathedral may not go to their tight ends that much. You'd like to see a little bit better numbers from that Cathedral offense, though, like in terms of getting Meeks the ball to give him that award. So ultimately, I landed on Aiden Steinfeld, 2022 IFCA Junior All-State team for 5A. Mr. Football candidate. He had 59 catches, which is the most of any other candidate on this list. 549 yards, which is more than any of these candidates. 9 touchdowns, which is way more than any of these other candidates. 3 games with 2 touchdowns. And so you kind of look past the fact that he was the lowest yards per game of any of these 3. He just put up insane numbers, compared to the other tight ends across the state. So snaps, Aiden Steinfeld, not too much of an argument there. He is our 3C media tight end for the preseason. So now we move on to our defense. We'll have defense, kicker, and special teams, or kick returner. Defense was a little tougher than I thought, too. I thought, we'll just look at the, points allowed stats from last year. We'll kind of look at some different things here and there. So what I kind of looked for is I looked for, kind of, again, team success. I looked for who you're returning, as well as what you did, as far as points allowed. I had Adams Central on the list. They were 12th in Indiana last year in points allowed. 10 points per game is what they gave up. They have 3 defenders. They had 3 defenders on the 1A Junior All-State team. Defensive lineman Trevor Curry, linebacker Keegan Bloom, who we talked about in the running back conversation, and defensive back Jack Hamilton. They were the 2022 state runner-ups. Also, Evansville Mater Dei, they were 30th in points allowed last season. 14 points per game is what they gave up. 2 defenders on the 2A junior all-state team for Mater Dei. Linebacker Spencer Turner, who had 90 tackles, 2 interceptions, 2 fumble recoveries. Defensive back Wyatt Stratman, who had 45 tackles, a sack, and 2 picks. And they were the 2022 state champs for 2A. You have Bishop Chittard, who had 2 defenders on the 3A junior all-state team, linebacker Sam Feeney and Luke Paricha, who's also a linebacker. They were the 2022 state champs. Chittard, I got a lot of grief for picking Lawrenceburg over Chittard to win the state title last year in 3A in our state finals preview show. Chittard, put your stats on Max Preps, man. Because I probably would have gone with Chittard here if they would have had some stats where I could have gone off about them a little bit, but instead I'm not going with them just because I just don't have the numbers in front of me to make the informed decision. Maryville had 3 defenders on the 5A junior all-state team. Rashawn McGee, 60 tackles, 1.5 sacks, fumble recovery. Terrell Elmore, 39 tackles, 4 sacks, an interception, and a fumble recovery. Trayvon Stevens, 32 tackles, a sack, and 2 fumble recoveries. So what I liked about Maryville is just the fact that you have a lot of great talent returning that not only made a lot of tackles, got a lot of sacks on the quarterback, but also created a lot of turnovers. They just made plays last year for Maryville, but it kind of was jarring for the fact that they didn't have anyone, or their defense wasn't one of the best in 5A, which was kind of concerning to me. So I didn't go with them. Who I ultimately went with was the defense from Carroll Fort Wayne. They were 10th in Indiana in points allowed per game last season. They allowed 10 points. They had 2 defenders on the 6A junior all-state team, linebacker Justin Anderson, who had 41 tackles, a sack, and 2 picks. Defensive back Brandon Steely, 37 tackles, 3 interceptions, and a fumble recovery. You also have Ashton Joseph Pasetsky, who was 14th in Indiana in sacks last season with 11. He also led the team in tackles with 64. He also recovered a fumble, and they are the 2022 state runner-ups for 6A. So they kind of had the playmaking ability of Maryville, plus the fact that they were one of the top teams in the state defensively in terms of points allowed. So Carroll Fort Wayne, that defensive unit is the best in my opinion in the state. So they are our defense for the All3C Media team. I was trying to do this all without taking a sip of water. But man, this is a lot to go through. All right, final 2 spots. Kicker. So my 3 candidates were Trevor Henkel from Zionsville, Dominic DeFreitas from Northwood, and Levi Dewey, the senior for Triton Central. Henkel was 10 of 13 for his field goals, 21 for 22 on extra points. He had a long field. His longest field goal was 35 yards. DeFreitas was a member of the 2022 IHSAA Junior All-State team for 4A. He was 7 of 8 in field goals. He was a perfect 59 for 59 in extra points. He had a long field goal of 50. Levi Dewey, for the senior for Triton Central, he was 10 of 12 in field goals, 33 of 37 for extra points. He had a long field goal of 57, according to Max Preps. IFD has his career long at 51, so regardless, 50-plus talent is pretty incredible when it comes to kickers. So really it was between DeFreitas and Dewey for me. I think I'm not entirely sure if that. I wrote down 59 and 59 extra points. I feel like he had missed one, but maybe he didn't. Maybe I'm second guessing myself in the moment. But I'm going ultimately with the Northwood junior Dominic DeFreitas. His field goal numbers aren't there. He doesn't have the same amount of field goals. He's attempted. He missed one fewer field goal, but attempted for fewer field goals. So that doesn't really affect me that much. But the fact that he tried way more extra points and was nearly perfect, if not perfect, if I'm not second guessing myself, plus that long of 50. So he's got the same amount of range as Dewey and was a little bit more effective on extra points. So I'm going with Dominic DeFreitas as my all-state team kicker. Took a break to sneeze there real quick. Sorry about that. I took a drink of water, and it's all coming unraveled. So congrats, Snaps, Dominic DeFreitas. Finally, our last position is our return man. Our candidates. Nigerian Tuggle on this list again, senior from Northwood. He had. We also had Jed Galvin, the junior from North Posey. Keegan Bowles, senior from Rushville, and Garrick Burge, a senior from Frankfurt. And so this was really a battle of what do you value more? Do you value kick return touchdowns? Do you value scores on kick returns? Or do you value yardage? Yeah, he's not scoring when he touches the ball, which obviously it's few and far between on kick return touchdowns and punt return touchdowns anyway. But what is it better to have someone who has proven he can score and go the distance, or is it better to have someone who okay, on a kick return, he's going to get us to the 30. He's going to get us to the 35. He's going to set us up in great field position. And far and away, I think the happy medium here, because you have Tuggle and Galvin, who didn't really have the yardage. 313 total return yards last year for Jed Galvin, 229 for Tuggle, but they each had 2 kickoff return touchdowns, which is, I didn't see really anybody with more than 3, or more than 2 last year on any of the stats sheets I saw for Max Prep. So there might be someone else out there with 3 or 4, but if you don't put it on Max Preps, I don't see it. So, So you have the production there scoring wise from them, but you look at some more of the guys who have put up the yardage. You have Keegan Bowles with 714 kick return yards last season, or total return yards. He had 66 on kickoffs, 66 on punt returns, and then you have Garrick Burge who had 607 yards, all coming on kick returns. So for me, what stood out to me was the numbers for Keegan Bowles, because not only does he have the most return yards of any of these 4 candidates, he also had a return touchdown on kickoffs, and he also had 66 punt return yards. So he had more overall yards, more kick return yards, and more punt return yards than any of the other candidates on this list, plus added a score in there. So, okay, yeah, he doesn't have the 2 touchdowns that some of the other candidates have, but he did at least score. He has proven that he can score on kickoffs. So I ultimately went with Keegan Bowles, the senior from Rushville. He is my returner on the preseason all 3C media team. So quickly, to recap, our 3C media quarterback, the preseason all 3C media team. Our quarterback, Jackson Willis, Jr., from Lutheran. We picked 2 running backs. They were Josh Ringer, the senior from East Central, and Trey Romiger, the senior from Paoli. We have 3 wide receivers on the list. TJ Caldwell from Calumet. Mylan Graham, the senior, he's a senior. Mylan Graham, also a senior from New Haven. And Bronte Johnson, the senior from Fort Wayne North. We had a tight end, Aiden Steinfeld, senior from Bloomington North. Our defense for the 3C Media the 3C Media, I can't talk now. The all 3C Media team for the preseason, our defense from Carroll Fort Wayne, they were insane last year. We also had kicker Dominic DeFreitas from Northwood as our kicker, and our return man is Keegan Bowles, the senior from Rushville. So there you have it. Those are the best players in the state of Indiana in high school football. Very excited to get the season underway. Very eager to see what these guys can do and what some of the other guys on this list can do to maybe leapfrog and get in that position, or we'll have other people emerge as the season goes on, which is pretty incredible. So, really fun making this list, and I'm excited. I mean, the season's getting ready to be here, and cannot wait for that. So that will do it for this week's edition of the Crash Course Podcast. Thank you guys all for listening, watching, hanging out. Remember, you can like us on Facebook, 3C Media. Go over to the Twitter channel at 3C Media Sports over there. Also, go show some love on the TikTok and the YouTube. You guys have been knocking it out of the park, showing a lot of love and support on our class-by-class previews, so we really appreciate that. So if you're listening on podcast channels, go over to YouTube, go over to TikTok, search us up on 3C Media, hit subscribe, ring the bell, or if you're just watching us on YouTube, subscribe and ring the bell as well. We would greatly appreciate that. And remember, you can listen to us every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course Podcast. You can find me at Crash Course FM on Twitter. Also, this Friday, we will be live 9:30 for our first kind of, scoreboard show. Is kind of what you can call it. We'll be live on TikTok, 3C Media all over there on TikTok, on the Tiki-Tacs. So make sure you guys are locked into that. We will be giving some scores. We'll be kind of breaking down all of the action from week 1 of Indiana high school football. So very excited for that. Also, next week, we will have one final preview for you for the football season. And that, of course, is the Indianapolis Colts preview. We will be finally getting you locked in and caught up on the Indianapolis Colts. Anthony Richardson today named the starter, so we'll be talking about that. Also, all the JT stuff, we'll be getting into that as well. So a lot of football conversations still left to go. We're just at the tip of the iceberg in our football coverage for the year. So again, thank you guys all for hanging out, and we will see you guys all next week. Have a good one.